Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Montgomery County Council. We begin today with a proclamation recognizing Project SAFE by Councilmember Mink, and I'll turn it over to her.
Okay. Nicole, this means you. Come on. All right, bring it in. All right. Oh, what a strong crew. Awesome. Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kristen Mink. I represent District 5, the east side of the county, and I'm so glad to be here with you all today to recognize some really incredible work that has been happening and that continues to happen on the eviction prevention front here in East County. We've had an incredible partnership that has come together through intensive work, collaboration, communication between community members, volunteers, nonprofits, faith institutions, resettlement agencies, the county, and the state. And because of that intensive work, we have together helped to prevent the eviction and continue the housing for over 377 individuals. And 377 is the floor. That's how many of we have a good tally of the number of refugees who were part of this effort, but there are many more folks beyond that who are not refugees who are also involved in this effort. So because of the work of many of the folks here standing with me today, hundreds of people are now housed because of their collaboration who would not have been otherwise. So thank you all so very much. Quick round of applause. So in a moment, I'm going to pass the mic down for everybody. If you could just say your name and who you are with that brings you to this space. But so folks know what these different entities have been doing. I'm just going to share a little bit. First, I want to note that Delegate Lorig Sharkoudian, who represents District 20, who wanted to be here today but is doing other important work and is represented today by her amazing staffer, Rose Stutz, has been a vital partner in helping us to coordinate with the state entities, helping us to secure necessary funding at the county level and for our partners, and has just been an amazing collaborator. Services to End and Prevent Homelessness under County HHS and their case management team, they have done incredible work. The caseloads that our case managers have on the CEF team are large and growing. We have increased them in the budget, which I appreciate, and they continue to do amazing work. HHS East County Regional Services Team, the Silver Spring office, just amazing work. The resettlement agencies, including Lutheran Social Services and the International Rescue Committee, have been vital partners. Our nonprofit partners like HIP, the Housing Initiative Partnership, Everyday Canvassing, and making sure that we were finding folks who needed to be found, who needed support. Project SAFE is a group that came together really around this effort. Especially with members of the faith community, the Muslim community, who came together to make sure that we were providing culturally competent, linguistically accurate services and case management. They did fundraising. They fundraised $10,000, and they continue to provide on a totally volunteer basis intensive case management to families. ISWA, the Islamic Society of the Washington area, provided volunteer case management, access to resources, including English classes, food, clothing, and more. The Muslim Community Center, MCC, they raised over $200,000 to help support these families, providing volunteer case management, including in Pashto, Dari, and Arabic. The Enclave Tenant Association, that organizing started again back just at the beginning of my term, and they do such incredible work on the ground at the Enclave, helping to support folks to prevent their eviction, as well as rapid response work if somebody does face eviction, to make sure there are folks who are there on the ground when they see those sheriffs arrive. You're going to have the Enclave Tenant Association leading a rapid response down there to make sure that if folks don't know how to get in touch with the county, that happens, securing moving trucks, and helping to make sure, ensuring that folks' belongings are not being picked up and nobody's walking away with them, and helping to make sure that there is nobody who is left without knowing where they are going to be at night. That is now being services that are being provided by volunteers, residents of the Enclave Tenant Association, and other, now that is spreading, other apartment buildings are chipping in as well, and it's an effort that is growing to try to make sure that no one anywhere is left in that situation all alone. So clearly this is really a team effort, and I really wanted to lift up the fact that we have community, we have resettlement agencies, we have the faith community, and we have government all coming together, and that is what has really, really made this work and been so very effective. So I am very personally grateful as a person who represents a district where so much of this has been unfolding, and I know I speak on behalf of the council when we say that we are very, very grateful for all of the work that you all have put into keeping our community safe. I'm going to pass the mic down, and if you could just share your name and who you are with.
Hi, I'm Tasnuva Khan. I am the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Community Equity and Sustainability, Inc., and also a team member of Project Safe. We are the fiscal sponsor of Project Safe.
Hi, I'm Pascal Lemaire. I'm the Vice President of the Enclave Tenant Association. Moving on.
Good morning. My name is Tania Chestnut. I'm the President of the Enclave Tenant Association with Progressive Maryland, also part of Housing Justice Montgomery.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sergio Nyengo, member of the Tenant Association, community organizer with AIM, and
Good morning. I'm Sandra Marshall, social work supervisor with Silver Spring Housing Stabilization Services. Many of my team were instrumental in helping the residents at the Enclave.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Anthony Young. I'm the current administrator for Housing Stabilization Services. We appreciate the City Council's efforts and support, as well as the general public, to support us in doing this work and moving forward.
Hi, I'm Christine Hong. I'm the Chief of Services to End and Prevent Homelessness, and so thankful to be part of this amazing collaboration that really accomplished an incredible feat.
Hey, my name is Ibrahim Alashi. I'm a community organizer with Housing Justice Montgomery and volunteer with Israel.
Hello, my name is Kumar Diawis. I'm the Office Services Coordinator for the Housing Stabilization Services under CEF. And it's an honor to be able to serve the community that I live in.
My name is Rose Stutz. I'm Chief of Staff to State Delegate Laura Charkoudian, representing her as she couldn't be here today.
I'm Rebecca Sosa with Department of Health and Human Services.
I'm Hugo Castaneda Fuentes. I'm with East County Coordination Program.
Danielle Alvarado Davis. I'm the Program Manager for East County Coordination and Paint Branch Member Cluster Projects with DHHS.
Good morning. My name is Raina Bates. I work for South Housing Stabilization, Georgia Avenue.
Good morning. My name is Amira Davis, and I also work for South Housing Stabilization. I'm the Client Assistance Specialist.
Hi, my name is Roman Gadiso. I'm a case worker in Housing Stabilization Services in Silver Spring office. I just wanted to say thank you all council members. I'm one of the case manager who got hired with the position that was approved by the council and proposed by our managers, and I'm able to do this impact. So thank you so very much for all your hard work.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Leon. I'm with Housing Industry Partnership. I thank every single one of you here for eviction prevention. Seriously. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nicole Graham, and I am a property manager within Montgomery County, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you, everybody, for all your assistance.
And I'm about to bring it back down here, but I first want to note Nicole, who very modestly said, "Oh, I'm a property manager." Nicole is really somebody who shows how everybody can find their place to make a huge impact, because she is a property manager who worked very closely with many of the people up here, as well as with my team, Ana Martinez, to help us find housing for folks who needed to move, for whom staying was not going to be an option. And it can be very, very hard, very difficult to find new housing for a family who is facing eviction. And so when we found Nicole, who has just been an absolute gem, that was a saving grace for many, many families. So we're so thankful for you for doing that and for providing that as an example of the type of work that can be done in a position like yours. So thank you.
Howdy, folks. Tino, he, him pronouns. I'm with Everyday Canvassing.
Morning, everyone. Hannah Stocks with International Rescue Committee.
Good morning. Ilhan Kagri from Project SAFE.
Good morning. Amberine Hussein, co-founder of Project SAFE, and I just wanted to echo Councilmember Mink's praise to Nicole Graham over there from the Waterford. Without her assistance and help, there would be so many families we would not have been able to give a second chance to, so we deeply thank her.
Usman Sarwar, MCC and member of Project SAFE.
Okay, we're just going to do very, very brief remarks, then we'll head to the proclamation. Christine Hong, Director of SEF.
Thank you so much. And I have to provide just incredible acknowledgement to Councilmember Mink. Throughout this effort, she has been on the ground, countless texts exchanged to make sure that every family that we served, that's more than 60 families, did not lose their housing. And if they did, that their experience of homelessness was very short. And I just want to acknowledge you for what we accomplished together. I really appreciated the partnership. It meant so much, and it has made such an important change in our community in the way we work together. So I am so proud to be part of a county that works together in the way that we just have. And you can see, I mean, we impacted together close to 400 people's lives, more than half of whom are children. And we did it in a way that was about collaboration and compassion. And this group stood behind the effort the whole way and made it all possible. And I also want to acknowledge our county leadership, our executive, Earl Stoddard, behind the scenes, countless texts also, as well as our sheriff's office, who worked with us in a way they have not in the past. And I just have to acknowledge them for that, as well as our full council, who supported the resources we had, as well as our state government. And so we were able to accomplish what we needed to prevent this group of families from experiencing homelessness. And this is an example of what we can do for our entire community when we come together like this. So I'm so proud at a time like this to be part of Montgomery County. And I just want to express my heartfelt appreciation to all of these people and all of the people who are not here today who contributed to the work that we accomplished together.
Thank you so much, Christine. Tania?
Good morning. Just as I said earlier, I'm Tania Chestnut, part of the Enclave Tenant Association. I must say, I think most of my speech was done earlier, but we have this rapid response, and it's just been truly amazing. We've been able to help so many tenants to basically get moved out of the enclave. We helped them to find homes. We helped them to get services with HHS. All these people behind me have been there. We work together. We will continue to work together. And we ask the community to help us. With our rapid response, we have people in the community that came out, helped us to pack up people. We put items in trucks. We took items to different locations for these tenants. And it's just out of the goodness of their heart. So we ask as much help as possible. Help us. Help the community. And thank you, everyone, for helping. We so appreciate it. Christian Mink, thank you.
Thank you, Tania. And last but certainly not least, Ilhan with Project SAFE.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what everybody has been saying, that this has been a very collaborative experience. What we accomplished in a very short period of time would not have been possible if it had not been for the collaboration of all the people here and the people who aren't here. And I just want to acknowledge Rebecca Sosa, who led this team of making sure everybody got together. And for the first time, what happened is we had people from the county, people from the community, people from the mosques, people from the resettlement organizations, all getting together to individually, one by one, look at each family and say, how can we make these families whole? How can we make them so that they reach self-sufficiency? I think it's really, really important to do that. The other thing is that you recognized, Kristen Mink recognized MCC, the mosque, and they were amazing in giving out so much money when we needed money to help pay back rents. Project Safe got a lot more money than $10,000. We actually got cars. Ambreen Hussein, who introduced herself earlier, people called her and said, how can I help you? Well, you're doing good things. What can we do? And she said, well, I need a car so that people can be employed. Well, 2 checks showed up at her door that afternoon so that we could buy cars for people. People donated cars. And so there are angels walking around in our county who are so generous and so willing to help when we need it. And I think we need to understand that as a community, we're just such a generous, caring community. And I want to thank first the DHS staff, Ms. Sandra Marshall and the rest of the team. They were available for us all the time and really, really tried to not only meet the needs, but just do it of the people that were in danger of being evicted, but also to do it in a culturally competent way, which I was just so impressed by. And finally, I want to thank the County Council for providing the resources and the backing and the funding that we needed to make this possible. And all kudos to Kristen Mink, who was on the ground, day and night over the weekends. I mean, you could call her at any time. She would call me at any time if people were in trouble. So it was, this is the kind of representation that we need. It's not part of her normal job. It's definitely outside of her normal business hours, but these are the kinds of people we have representing us in this county. So thank you, everybody who was involved in this effort.
Thank you, Ilhan. Okay, and now I'm going to read the proclamation. Whereas a coalition of community members, nonprofits, religious institutions, resettlement agencies, and government representatives came together to develop solutions to prevent a large number of evictions from occurring in the East County area. And whereas county government representatives, including staff from the Department of Health and Human Services, Services to End and Prevent Homelessness, sought additional funding at the state and local levels and provided intensive case management while coordinating with resettlement agencies such as International Rescue Committee and Lutheran Social Services and Ethiopian Community Development Council. And whereas the Muslim Community Center, Islamic Society of the Washington area, and Project Safe provided volunteer case management to residents and connected them to resources, including helping them find employment and new homes. This volunteer team provided appropriate cultural and linguistic support, especially in Pashto, Dari, and Arabic. And whereas residents and grassroots organizations, including the Enclave Tenant Association, Everyday Canvassing, Housing Initiative Partnership, and more, formed a rapid response team that connected residents to eviction prevention resources and social services, as well as provided support on the day of eviction. And whereas, through the collaboration of various partners, the eviction of well over 300 individuals was prevented, and these community leaders continue to organize to prevent future evictions from occurring. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby celebrates the East County Eviction Prevention Collaboration for your compassion and commitment to working with your neighbors and preventing individuals from being unhoused, presented on this 22nd day of July in the year 2025, signed by myself and Kate Stewart, Council President. Thank you.
Good to see you. Yeah. Good to see you. Yeah, hi, this morning. Yeah, it's good to see you. Hi, good to see you. Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. Yeah. Yes. All right. Good. All right. Thank you to Councilmember Mink and everyone who is here from Project Safe and all the work that you have done in the community. You really have set up a great model for us, unfortunately, during these times that we may call upon in other locations. So thank you for all of your work. We're now going to move on to general business. There are no announcements and no minutes for approval this week. Item 1 on our agenda is an interview of the county executive's nominee for deputy director for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, Jenny Snapp, and we are welcoming Mr. Madalino, Director Bruton, who's virtual, and Ms. Snapp. The deputy director position with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is significant in supporting the department's mission to ensure fair and equitable relations between landlords and tenant, increase the supply of affordable housing, and maintain existing housing in a safe and sanitary condition. I'll turn it over to Mr. Madalino, but I will say, Ms. Snapp, I think you came on a very good day, given the proclamation that we just had and the great example of our county government working with the county council and our residents. So, Mr. Madalino, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Vice President, members of the council. It's a pleasure to be before you. Rich Madalino, the Chief Administrative Officer. Thank you very much, Councilmember Mink, for also highlighting the work of so many of the county employees who help out on issues of housing, whether that's in the Department of Housing and Community Affairs or the Department of Health and Human Services. We do a lot in this county. It was great to hear that. It was great to hear the reference to the angels who live amongst us, too, and many of those angels are actually employees of the Montgomery County government. So thank you for that recognition. So it's a pleasure to be before you to talk about our nominee, Jenny Snapp, to be the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. So when we went for the search for this position, we know that we have in Director Bruton a housing policy expert. Someone recognized for his work, and I think many of you enjoy working with him on all the variety of policy issues. As we have all worked together to change and grow the responsibilities of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, we wanted to make sure we had a deputy director who had a wealth of experience with management, with standing up programs, with dealing with procurement and those sorts of issues of the day-to-day operations of a department, and not another policy expert. We found someone who both has policy experience in the field, but actually in-depth management, a current employee of the city of Rockville, but a longtime employee of Franklin County, Ohio. If you don't know Franklin County, Ohio, it is the county that the city of Columbus sits in. So it's a 1.3 million person county, resident county, where she was the chief operations officer of their Department of Planning. It's a longer term than we use, Economic Development and Planning. So she supervised many staff. She worked on standing up IT programs, new policies. She worked on procurement, hiring. So she had that background that she brought to Montgomery County, because who wouldn't want to leave Ohio and come to Montgomery County? She is a resident of Rockville, but after working for the city of Rockville, which is a wonderful municipality, she wanted to get back to county government on a larger scale. So an interesting opportunity when we had a vacancy with the department, the deputy director for the department. Ms. Snapp not only spent that time working in Franklin County, she worked on a regional planning commission, an economic development commission. She's a graduate of the University of Toledo. She has settled here in Rockville. She has a son who's at middle school in the Montgomery County Public Schools. So she's now invested in our county and in making sure that we provide great services to our residents, and especially through the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. So Madam President, I'm thrilled to introduce Ms. Snapp and ask respectfully for your confirmation for her as our Deputy Director.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Madaleno. Director Bruton, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you very much, Council President Stewart, and thank you, Council President Stewart, for facilitating my being able to join virtually, and my apologies to the Council for not being there in person today. I and the other members of the leadership team at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs are very excited about the possibility, with Council approval, of Ms. Snapp joining the leadership team. While we have an amazing leadership team and an excellent staff of a little over 130 in the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, we have very much missed the role of Deputy Director over the past several months and look forward very much to Ms. Snapp joining us, given her significant experience in a similarly sized jurisdiction, many years of experience in Franklin County, Ohio, and also her range of experience that she's had in Franklin County as well as in Rockville, the city of Rockville, given her experience with planning, affordable housing, emergency rental assistance, community outreach. She really brings a significant range of experience, which is very complementary to the significant range of duties that have been assigned to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. I will also say, given the trust that the county executive and the council have displayed in the Department of Housing and Community Affairs by significantly expanding our portfolio over the past couple of years, including rent stabilization and the management administration of the short-term rental law, it will be wonderful to have Ms. Snapp's managerial and administrative experience in helping us improve those programs and expand their reach. I think Rich Madaleno did an excellent job of outlining the benefits that Ms. Snapp will bring to the department, and so I'll end my comments there and encourage the council to vote in favor of her nomination to be the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Bruton. Ms. Snapp, welcome. I'm going to have a few questions for you, and then we will open the floor to my colleagues for any additional questions. First, to kick us off, please discuss your background and experiences and how they apply to the role of Deputy Director for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Council President Stewart. First, I want to say thank you. I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm excited at the possibility of joining the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and joining Montgomery County as a possible employee and a Deputy Director pending your approval. First of all, I want to say that I have about 24 years of public service and local government. So it's ingrained in who I am. For me, public service is about serving our customers, serving the residents. And for me, majority of my career comes from county government. So it really is a shoe that fits for me. I'm excited at the possibility of coming back to county government. As you know, I spent about 2.5 years at the city of Rockville. It was a great experience, and it was a learning experience to be in municipal government. But I'm really excited to get back into something that I know well. So I would say that particularly my experiences in Franklin County and my career in general are well suited to this position, particularly in leadership and management experience. I've spent the majority of my career in a leadership position. So I've managed staff, I've worked in mentoring staff, coaching staff, and I really feel that there's a huge difference between leadership and management. It's my preference to lead staff before I manage. I want to make sure that I'm completing the work and fulfilling the expectations of county council and also the administration. I've always provided stability to an organization. I've always supported the deputy in the roles that the director in the roles that I've had. I started out my career as a director or a planner and then moved to director of a 3-county regional planning commission. So I have operational and budgetary experience. When I was at Franklin County, I started out as assistant director, but had 2 promotions. So moving into managing a community development section, as well as planning, building, zoning, and GIS. And then adding community development, and then eventually moving on to chief operating officer, so managing the operations of the organization. So, I have that fiscal and operational aspect of experience too that I think will complement what I bring to Montgomery County. I know the role of a deputy, that is to support the director and the initiatives and programs of the organization. I also want to mention that Franklin County itself has about 1.3 million residents. The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission expects that to grow by an additional million by the year 2050. So I'm used to working in a county that experiences high growth, and that means that growth affects housing, and that affects affordable housing. There are a lot of similarities in Franklin County. We were an urban and suburban county with some rural aspects as well. So I believe having experience in that in Franklin County also will suit me well in Montgomery County. Franklin County has a great deal of diversity. We also have areas of concentrated poverty. There's about a 16.7% poverty rate in Franklin County, but nearly double that for African American and Hispanic population, and 25% for children. So it's important, and what I've learned to do is that we have to think about diversity. We have to think about serving communities and people of color. And those people usually have lower home ownership rates. So it's important that equity and diversity always comes into play when you're thinking about housing. In addition, with such a growing population, often that comes a shortage of housing. So it's important for me to work with Director Bruton and the County Council to ensure that we're addressing housing shortages and affordability as well. When I was at Franklin County, I was administering the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. That was to the tune of $23 million. I worked on that program from start to finish. So reporting to the U.S. Treasury Department, crafting contracts, presenting resolutions to the county commissioner, and working with our sub-recipients and our community members. And also working with the city of Columbus to ensure we weren't duplicating our grant program. And because the money was going out the door, which I think is equally important here in Montgomery County, we were awarded an additional $10 million in that program. In addition, through my work at the City of Rockville, we were engaged with the housing department in the housing action team. So working with landlord and tenants and property management at troubled properties. We were meeting and have been meeting with some of our troubled properties like Bethany House, meeting with tenants as well as property managers, and really trying to work on some of the issues that some of those property owners and tenants, most importantly, are facing in those properties. I have experience in customer service. I think that's really important to point out here. We need to work at a standard of excellence to ensure that all of our residents are being served.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. My second question is, what do you view as the most pressing housing-related challenges in Montgomery County, and what are your short-term and long-term goals for helping DHCA address those challenges?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think affordable housing is one of the most pressing issues that residents face in Montgomery County. I've done some research and also spoken to Director Bruton at length about some of these issues, and I know that the County Council has passed a number of initiatives to address affordable housing that include production and preservation. The Housing Initiative Fund is one such program that the County Council has dedicated a great deal of funds towards. and the money seems to be going out the door, which I think is a sign of a successful program. And I think it's imperative that we manage these programs efficiently and effectively and transparently. I think long term, as I pointed out, it's important that our funds are transparent and they're running performatively. Money is being spent, and similar to the program that I ran in Franklin County with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, I have experience in ensuring that programs are being handled and efficiently run. In the short term, I think it's important to focus on internal and external engagement. And that means actually reaching out to community organizations such as RHE, as well as the HOC. And similar to the presentation we saw earlier, collaborating to ensure that we're working with our partners and leveraging resources to address the affordable housing problem. In addition, I think it's imperative that we're building relationships internally, and that means with staff. I think one of the things that I particularly enjoy is working with staff, mentoring staff, and engaging staff. And I think in order to do that, that brings out the initiative in staff and to make sure that they're actually engaged in running programs effectively. Of course, along with that is to ensure the diversity of the community and staff and spending time with those staff. For instance, at each department I've been at, I've paid particular attention to the inspection staff, so the code enforcement staff. I've often gone out, I've tried to get into the office early to engage that staff, do ride-alongs. I think that goes a long way in learning what they're doing to engage actual communities. In addition, you get to know the staff and you build on their strengths and what they know, and you learn from what they're doing. And it's a morale builder and it's a team builder. I'd also like to build relationships with the union representatives and also the internal labor representative, if there is one, or committee, if there is one as well. I got the opportunity to do that at Franklin County because I also managed bargaining employees as well, and then get to know the contract. Tenant-landlord affairs are obviously important, so engaging with property owners, that's another short-term goal, and make sure that education is a part of the work we do with tenant and landlords. And then, of course, building relationships with the county council.
Thank you very much. And you touched upon this a little before about the importance of racial equity, but specifically, what measures would you take to advance racial equity and social justice in the department and countywide?
Well, I think working with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice and the Office of Community Partnerships is in building that relationship is really important, and bringing that information back to staff and educating staff on what I'm learning. I think, I have a strong history of building relationships in community, and I think my planning background obviously helps with that, but really working with hard-to-reach communities is important. I can give a couple examples of that work in Franklin County, but also in Rockville. I personally took a class at a mosque in Northeast Ohio, and that really helped me engage with our Somalian residents in Franklin County. We had the second largest population of Somalians in the country, behind Minneapolis-St. Paul. So, and we had a lot of Somalian customers, a lot of Somalian residents. And it was important for me to learn how to better engage with that population. And even in Rockville, I think taking that class, that 6-week course, really helped me when we were working on the Tower Oaks common ownership community. I was tasked with working with the MPDU owners there who were experiencing a lot of tensions with the HOA board. And, a lot of the MPDU, a majority of the MPDU owners at Tower Oaks are Afghani. And, you know, the language I used, really leaning into the things I learned in that class really benefited me in engaging that community. In addition, knowing the times when you should have meetings, for instance, during Eid, ensuring that we weren't scheduling meetings when they were breaking fast was very important. So, in addition, getting to know the employees and recognizing differences. I've been in a lot of interviews in my time where an employee might say, a potential employee might say, well, it's my goal to treat everybody the same. I don't think that's the correct answer. I think it's about recognizing differences among people and really celebrating those differences and getting to know people individually as they are. So we really, you know, recognize that all the work we do here in Montgomery County and in local government must be informed to really achieve racial equity and diversity and inclusion.
Great, thank you very much. And my last question is, are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware?
Well, as you know, I'm currently a City of Rockville employee, so I'll be working with the Office of Ethics and engaging them on what those parameters should be when I'm working at DHCA on any projects that concern the City of Rockville.
Great, thank you very much. I will turn it over now to Councilmember Andrew Friedson.
Thank you. Thanks for your service, for your time with us today and previous to today, and meeting with many of us and your interest in this role. My question is, what do you think the biggest challenge that we have in housing in Montgomery County, and how does DHCA specifically work on addressing it? And what do you think the best thing that we have related to housing, and how do we build on it and strengthen it from a DHCA perspective specifically?
Well, I'm going to start with the positive. So I think I spoke about the Housing Initiative Fund. I'm setting aside that fund for new units. So production and preservation, I think, is a great balance to have in your toolbox for affordable housing. You know, I drive on Neville Street frequently because my son has some classes on Neville Street for fencing, and I see those housing projects coming into fruition. So I think there are 2 housing projects on Neville Street that are about 300 units with an investment of approximately $34 million that comes from that fund that you've dedicated for new builds for affordable housing. So, I mean, I think that's really a great project to budgetarily set aside funds for affordable housing. But I think equally important, it also addresses the preservation and the need for people to stay in their home. And that oftentimes affects the senior population. There are a great deal of seniors that can't afford to move to a new unit at times. And there are often usually built in some grant programs like HOME or CDBG, home repair programs that really affect and help and assist seniors. So I think those are the positives. I think also the positive is the opportunity to work with Director Bruton, who seems to have a lot of initiatives as well in the affordable housing realm. And I think the second part of your question was about the challenges facing the department and, equally, again, it's affordable housing. How many units do we need to keep up with the demand? I think this is a fast-growing region in the DMV. There's a lot of people that seem to be frozen out of the need for affordable housing, and generally the ones that are affected the most are people of color. So It's about ensuring that we're really addressing the need, and we're really addressing the need in an equitable way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm excited about you. I had to say, you have a very impressive resume, and I truly love your interview. You come across as somebody who's very sincere. And I think the highlight for me is your background on operations and management, working with our awesome union, making sure that we have a strong relationships built in trust. And I look forward to voting for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, rounding out the PHP committee, Council Vice President Juando.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Yeah, please drink water. I'm excited about you as well. I really appreciated your answers. I did some checking up on you. I used to work for Sherrod Brown, and I know a lot of the commissioners in Franklin County, and they spoke highly of you.
Oh, thank you very much.
With two of them, and I'll share that for my colleagues as well who do our job for Franklin County, and said that people respected you. Everything you just said, they confirmed. They said you went out and talked to people, and that you cared about folks, and you had a great approach to the work. So, and that really speaks highly of you as well. And I think your focus on both production and preservation, and obviously protecting renters. We just had a conversation about that. It's really the right approach. We have significant challenges in housing across the country. We are at the epicenter of that. Affordability remains a concern. I'm glad that you said affordability is the biggest challenge. I think the residents of Montgomery County would agree with you. And so we really have to be smart, but we also don't have unlimited resources. And we have a federal government right now which is not giving us more support, they're giving us less. And so that's kind of where I wanted to ask you just a question. Based on your experience in various roles, what are you looking at from how we interact with the feds, and what that means about how we conduct our business here to provide high quality, affordable housing for the most amount of people, particularly those who are in highest need?
Well, first I want to say that, I've always strive to do my job regardless of, who I work for. I started out in 3 counties that were fairly conservative. And I felt it was my job to educate and bring people along. So, it's imperative that we serve regardless. So, we are in a really tough environment, and probably tougher than I've seen in my career. So, I like to think that, we'll push through, and we'll continue to serve the needs of our community, because we are local government. Local government plays a unique role in really serving the community regardless of what's happening at the federal level. We are affected by the federal level, but I've often put a lot of faith in local government, in the service that we provide. Because I think residents look, and they often don't realize it, that they look to us in times of great need. And we often provide services that are there regardless. And it's a cause it's a cause, and it's an absolute need that we provide to our residents, regardless of what's happening at the federal level. And I like to think positive too, because we also have a state government that advocates for the local level. So
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and thank you for putting yourself forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. Ms. Snapp, welcome.
Thank you.
I appreciate your presentation and your Q&A, and picking up on the point that you just noted, local government has to work.
Mm-hmm.
People depend on us for housing needs, for trash collection, a conversation we'll get to in a little bit, and everything in between. And so the focus needs to be there, and appreciate your deep understanding of that through your lifetime of work. Thank you. And also appreciate the administration's retailoring of the position, recognizing more emphasis needed to be on the operation side as we continue doing more things here in Rockville to support more housing, to support tenants, to support the whole ecosystem. We need someone more in the daily mix, and that's the important role that you all play. And so I look forward to supporting you, but I'm going to take this as an opportunity to ask a related question of the administration about housing. It's been shared with me, and I can direct this to CAO Madalino, and I think Mr. Bruton, Director Bruton is still online. There is a state law that Annapolis passed, HB 151, that requires reporting requirements for jurisdictions that adopt local laws regarding rent and the increases of rent. And it requires those local jurisdictions to report the number of permits that have been issued for housing production. Are you familiar or aware if we have submitted those reports to Annapolis?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Glass, I'm not. I don't know if Director Bruton is.
Unfortunately, Director Bruton was not able to stay on, but
Okay.
I think we can follow up.
I will
with
get
him.
you an answer to that as soon as I get back to the office.
Appreciate that. HB 151.
50, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Snapp. Look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for talking about your very sort of person worker centered approach to the work that you've done. You know, obviously this department has a lot of compliance functions, right? And we're a very large county with a lot of needs, and the folks who are relying on us as the government to do that work are those who at least have the voices to combat things that are wrong that are being done to them. So if you could talk a little bit about based on what you've already expressed as your approach to your work, what you would say could be some ideas for improvement in the department's compliance functions and oversight functions.
Well, I would say, first of all, I've worked on administering grant programs, HUD entitlement programs, and working with the staff and fiscal administration staff on doing that as well. And also working with local HUD field staff on those issues. So I think, again, building the relationships with our HUD staff or any fiscal staff to ensure that we're meeting the requirements of our grant programs and our any fiscal administration of the programs is absolutely imperative. But I also feel like part of my role is the engagement of the staff and also the programs that we administer. My past has been working on performative programs and performative grants. So ensuring that, one, they're transparent, but two, that our grantees and our subrecipients are reporting such a way that we are clear about the meeting requirements of the programs that we fund them for. And usually in the past, when I've worked with subrecipients and staff that have worked with subrecipients, we have all those requirements laid out. And it's also imperative that we engage our subrecipients to ensure that they know what those requirements are about. And that assists greatly in ensuring compliance. So again, I think part of that, again, is I've brought this up a lot, but it's engagement and collaboration.
And in terms of, and thank you for that, in terms of sort of the non-grant work, but where the function of the department itself is that just basic compliance function, how would you best incorporate challenges that the employees are facing in attaining the goals in order to, like, how would you approach making changes in order to help them better achieve their results?
Well, I think I could talk about this all day because one of my favorite things to do is to lead. So I think if you're getting to know employees, you're also getting to know the work that they're doing. And that's part of the function of a good leader. And part of those discussions, and I think the short-term goals that I talked about, is really getting to know the programs that they're working on, the programs that they're engaging in, and really digging into that work and really tapping into their strengths as an employee, but really working on finding out, are there gaps in programs? Are there transparencies, are issues? Are there needs out of programs that have to be worked on? Do they have to be part of the work program for the employee? Do they have to be part of the professional development program of the employee? I would hate to see me get into a situation with an employee where they find that out during their performance appraisal.
Right.
That needs to be a constant communication. I prefer to be in communication so I don't get to that point with an employee. I would rather know on the front end if there's an issue rather than the back end in a point where I'm in a performance appraisal. I don't think any employee deserves to go into a performance appraisal and think and all of a sudden find out that they have an issue.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sales?
Thank you, and thank you so much for your interest and passion about housing and keeping people housed. I'm going to ask a question about an OLO report that was released last month studying DHCA's code enforcement practices. And among its findings were that DHCA is not in full compliance with code enforcement laws for multifamily properties, and that its complaint-based model perpetuates racial inequities by placing the burden of enforcement on renters. As Deputy Director, how do you intend to address these concerns to ensure the health and safety of our diverse and most vulnerable residents?
Thank you for the question. I understand that this report has come out. I would be working with Director Bruton in addressing this report, but I want to mention that, I think it's important to engage as part of this process and ensure that we're engaging tenants and landlords and the staff to ensure that we're addressing the problems of the report. I want to mention, I've not seen the report, so, it's hard for me to answer fully the question, but I can only speak from my experience in having issues with code enforcement is to bring the problem to light and actually address the issues that are in the report and engage fully to make sure we're addressing the problems that arise.
Thank you. It's report 2025-06.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Then I have Councilmember Mink.
Hi, thank you. Really impressed by your interview. You said so many things that are exactly what I would want to hear from someone who's going to be moving into the position that hopefully you will be here shortly. The importance of working directly with staff on a close level, working directly with community, being culturally sensitive and appropriate in how all that is done. It's all really critical, and really appreciate the emphasis on the code enforcement team as well, making sure that you're getting to know them, and that what that means is getting to know the work that they're doing. I think is well put and very astute. And I think the ride-alongs I was really interested in. My staff has gone along with code enforcement at times, and we've heard directly from many residents who have had code enforcement come through. And so, there is so much to learn there, because if there's differences between how different inspectors are doing things, and you can say, oh wow, that's a really great idea, it'd be great to have that implement, So I just wanted to get to hear a little bit about what you have observed in doing those ride-alongs, maybe just an example or two of best practices or observations that you have made.
Well, I did some ride-alongs in Franklin County with both the code enforcement staff as well as the building inspection staff. And, for me, as their manager, it went a long way in understanding exactly, one, what they do on a day-to-day basis, but also in appreciating what they do on a day-to-day basis. But for me, it also informed some of the questions that I get. Oftentimes, I was the end point when a complaint would come. And it also taught me to, one, see that there are deeper issues sometimes when you do get a complaint. Code enforcement is one of those areas that people get really upset, rightly so. Often it's about property. It's about their living space at times. And, I think it gave me a greater awareness and sensitivity to those issues. The same in Rockville. When I started, I went on a ride along with one of the code enforcement members, and it was a great way for me to get to know. I was a new resident, so it was a great way for me to get to know the city, but also to understand the rental inspection process. And for me, rental inspections is one of those areas that mayor and council in Rockville frequently ask questions about. So it was informed, on the personal side, because I had viewed the inspection, a way for me to understand that process better. As far as best practices go, I think the best practice is the customer service side. I've seen inspectors that can be abrupt. And I've seen inspectors that are very warm and friendly. And I will tell you, there is a massive difference in the way the resident or the customer responds based on how the inspector treats the resident. It goes a long way in the way the resident or the tenant or how defensive they are or the way they ask questions, just based on the attitude that the inspector has. So to me, customer service goes a long way.
I'm so glad that you said that. I think that you really hit the nail on the head. We need to make sure that we have a quality, consistent checklist that everybody is using. Really need that. But we also, the implementation of that, if you go in and you ask a tenant and they trust you enough to answer them about what's going on in their unit, you're going to learn a lot more than somebody who's just looking around without that assistance. And so that's where that variability comes in. And so well said. And look forward to hopefully having you on board. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for applying and for wanting to be a part of this. I too appreciate your thoughts and concerns. Did a very good job on this interview. But I also want to take a moment to thank DHCA and Director Bruton and for always getting back to my office, and I'm assuming for all our offices, when there's a concern. I don't have to tell you, when you're dealing with someone's housing or code issues, it obviously cannot be any more directly affecting that person and their family. And the faster we can get something solved, the better off everyone is. And I also, and I think it should be noted, as you know, in Rockville and Gaithersburg, the 3rd District, that you would have good conversations with your counterparts, but code enforcement, et cetera, is not done by DHCA in those areas. And but I do want to point out about your observation about customer service. And that is so very important, and I think that needs to be, and everybody has a good day, everybody has a bad day. And that's on both sides for the residents as well as the property owner, as well as the inspectors and everyone else associated. But when customer service is friendlier, then we can get a whole lot more accomplished. And I understand there's times people get frustrated, and this is the 3rd or 4th time you've been there. That gets a little old. But the fellow who was mayor before me in Gaithersburg used to have an expression, you can step on somebody's shoes and not mess up the shine. And that's exactly what's necessary in a lot of cases, because the property owner, not all, but many property owners want to get something fixed as quickly as possible. And the resident certainly needs it. So my only question for you, and you don't have to answer at this moment, but communication is a key. So have you thought about how, and once you get involved, what's as good as we do, how can we do it better?
Well, I expect I'll have more thoughts on that once I get started.
Sure.
But, you know, something that was very important to the Franklin County Commissioners was customer service. You know, their tagline is every resident, every day. And they meant that. So, you know, for employees, it was imperative that we take that seriously. And the agency I came from was a very front-serving resident agency. We had people coming into the office, we had them calling. You know, it's important that you listen well, because people were sometimes transferred 3, 4, 5 times before they ever made it to the appropriate person. And I think sometimes that happens in local government. They don't need to get somebody on the line, and this has happened before in my career, where somebody, and often they don't know if they are even calling the right local government jurisdiction. Just because their address is Rockville doesn't mean they're actually calling the right local government. So they don't need somebody yelling down the phone and saying, who picks up your trash, and then escalating who picks up your trash 5 times, because they may not even know that. So, you know, communication is absolutely key as part of customer service. You can answer in such a way, in a calm, collected, listening manner to make somebody feel heard. And usually making them feel heard and listening to them will go a long way in eventually responding in such a way that you're educating them and pointing them in the right direction in most cases.
Thank you. I look forward to voting for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
I don't have a question. I just don't want to feel left out in saying that your answers were really spot on, and I really appreciate your emphasis. I agree with Councilmember Katz on customer service, but being out in the community and focus on your staff. And I look forward to voting for you, but more importantly, I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Snapp. Thank you, Mr. Madaleno, for joining us today, putting your name forward, and we look forward to moving forward in the process. So
Thank you
very
so much. I
Have a
appreciate
great
your
day.
time.
Great. All right. We now are on to agenda item number 2, which is a briefing from the Department of Environmental Protection regarding strategy for solid waste disposal. We'll take a moment as people are shifting who's at the table, and I want to welcome the Department of Environmental Protection. And in a moment, I will turn it over to the chair of the Transportation Environment Committee, Chair Glass. But in terms of just background today, if this is the first you're tuning in to our conversations on solid waste management, I want to say this is a continuation of conversations that we have been having with DEP. We had in January of this year a debrief on the future of zero waste in Montgomery County, and we had numerous conversations during our FY26 budget deliberations. As folks will recall, in November 2024, the county executive and the council received a notice of intent to extend the resource recovery facility contract by 5 years from April 2026 to April 2031, with flexibility for early termination. The county executive recommended moving forward with the extension and proposed short-term capital improvements to support continued operation. The council took proactive steps in our FY26 budget process to fund the improvements, ensuring safety and reliability of operations at the facility, while long-term waste strategies are being considered. Demonstrating fiscal responsibility and a commitment to a thoughtful long-term planning, the council deferred additional funding in the FY26 budget until DEP conducted further evaluation of all available disposal alternatives. On June 3rd, the council received the DEP-led consultant report, Municipal Solid Waste Management System Alternative Analysis by Arcadis, and this details the cost and other impacts of options for handling solid waste. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from our Department of Environmental Protection and receive an update on their assessment of options and steps in moving forward. As we move forward through this process, the council will continue to lead a transparent planning process on this subject. We are taking a thoughtful and informed approach to evaluate all long-term waste disposal options. And I do want to note that, and I believe the Director Monger has announced his departure, and that this will be, unfortunately, probably your last formal presentation before our body. And I just want to thank you for that and thank the whole team. And then with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for advocating and elevating for this conversation with the full body. This is an important conversation. I want to pick up where you left off by thanking Director Munger. It's been nearly 2 years since he became director. There's been a lot on his plate. He's been here at the council, not only talking with us publicly, but speaking with many of us in our offices and on Zoom about the vast amount of work that we are doing and the work that we need to continue doing to ensure that our waste management systems are as clean and efficient as can be. Again, I noted with DHCA that local government has to work, and the important work of DEP is one of the first things that people recognize and know of. And trust me, we all hear about it when trash is not collected or they see it scattered on the road after it's been picked up. And so thank you, Director Munger, for all of your work, and look forward to working with the team and Acting Director Seltzer as well. As the Council President noted in giving a brief update onto how we got here, we've been having lots of conversations about the zero waste initiatives, and now that we've gone through the budget, there is the Arcadis alternative analysis, and that information will help inform our collective decision-making before the contract with the incinerator expires in 2031. And the stakes are really important, and they're high. In 2020 alone, the Dickerson incinerator burned more than 540,000 tons of waste. including significant amounts of construction and demolition debris, which is particularly toxic and polluting when burned. And today the incinerator still burns a bulk of the county's solid waste, including 147,000 tons of food waste each year, which is why getting that composting facility up and running as quickly as possible is so critically important. And then on the flip side, approximately 26% of the waste that's burned becomes ash, which the county's policy currently transports to a landfill in Virginia in a low-income community, majority people of color. So we have to have an honest and frank conversation about the environmental justice concerns and about the social justice concerns as well. And so I want to thank Council President. I know we'll get into the details here, but thank you for setting up this conversation.
Great. Mr. Lachenko, do you have anything to add to that before I turn it over to Director Monger?
Yeah, just to note that DEP has provided a briefing today, which I think the council will find very helpful in terms of the background, how we got here, and their recommendations for how we move forward from here. So I'll turn it over to them to do that, and I'll be flipping the slides.
Great.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Council President. Thank you, Chair Glass. I want to really just start by saying a thank you to this full body for the attention and focus that you're placing on this really important issue. And if you only remember one thing from this entire conversation, please remember that we heard you loud and clear that you would like information along the way on this process outside of the budget process. So the conversation today and the conversations we'll be having going forward are a continuation of our engagement with Council so that you have all the information at your disposal and understand exactly where we are in the process and exactly what the implications are of this process as the county moves forward. And on that note, if you remember two things I say today, the second thing I would like you to remember is that it's very important that we move forward quickly as a county, and I'll explain why. But we'll walk through the timelines, we'll walk through the dollar figures involved, and we'll underscore why it's important and why it's so, I'm appreciative of the Council President for having this conversation in the busy few weeks at the end of July that we continue moving forward in this process. So those are the two main things that I hope you remember, but there's a lot more to come here this morning. Lastly, we spent a lot of time talking about this in the budget process, but all of the pieces we're talking about have budget implications and time implications. So it's important to remember, and we'll get into more detail on this, that when we talk about the systems change that we are in the process of implementing, it's important that we leave ourselves the appropriate amount of time to make this transition, because we are talking, as Chair Glass said, about significant volumes. Obviously, it's a critical function here in the county, so we really appreciate Council's thoughtful and deliberative approach to this, but also want to underscore that we really need to move forward with this transition quickly, and that's what we'll talk about more today. And so while this morning's conversation is not focused around a decision that Council needs to make, want to make sure you all have a very clear understanding of where we are in the process. Next slide, please. Just by way of very brief background, this was mentioned by the Council President. The county had commissioned a report to look at the different alternatives we have for disposing our municipal solid waste. And that report provided a lot of really good information about the long-term options we have as a county. And we've shared that report, as was mentioned, with the council, looking into all those options and comparing them based on waste diversion, greenhouse gas emissions, and of course total cost of service. However, it's important to understand, for context of where we are right now, that this was not an assessment of near-term or bridge options, which is what we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about this morning. Importantly, that analysis also did not include a solicitation of binding price proposals for the alternatives, and we'll talk more about how the county's in the process of getting that information, with it obviously being critical to moving forward. That said, next slide, please. I did want to underscore a few of the key takeaways from that analysis. Number one, we do have the option here in the county to significantly increase waste diversion and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by adding advanced waste processing technologies into our system. Number two, the process for doing that will include significant capital costs and will also take time to implement. And as we'll talk a little bit more about this morning, we have the option of implementing that concurrently as we make the transition away from our current waste system. So I just wanted to underscore those key takeaways for context of what we learned throughout that process. But the majority of this morning's time, next slide please, will be spent talking really about what's next for this transition. And so by way of brief background, and many of you are familiar with some of these dates already, wanted to underscore that the contract we have in place, it ends April 1st, 2031, and obviously the county will need to have a permanent or alternative bridge system in place prior to that date. Given the timeline I talked about previously with respect to advanced waste processing technologies, there are fundamentally two options now available to the county for consideration at the immediate time. Number one is long hauling to an out-of-county landfill. Number two is procuring a new contract for operating the resource recovery facility. And as I noted previously, development and implementation of the advanced waste processing technologies that I referenced could be done in conjunction with option one, long haul, but for financial reasons I'll explain more fully, would not be available with option two of a new contract on the RRF. Next slide, please. So as we've talked about before, in all of these conversations, we come back to two things, time and money. So let's start with money. So I want to caveat that these are estimates, and the actual price information associated with the contracts we're talking about will be determined through the procurement process that we are implementing at present. But there's a lot of information on the slide, so I'm going to summarize it here. Key takeaways circled in red, but because the resource recovery facility would require capital costs to repair and upgrade that facility, it is the more expensive option. And on this slide, you can see a comparison of what that looks like in terms of a per ton, broken down by a per ton cost. It's a delta of about $22 per ton. Broken out over the course of a year, the RF is estimated to cost at least $13 million per year annually. And I want to note that I've made the reference previously to someone's car. And how when you own a car, you have to take care of the car, even if you don't, no matter how much you drive it, you still have to pay for that car. Similarly, the infrastructure we have in place at present in the RRF is infrastructure that we have to maintain as long as we're using it. And that is the case even if we reduce the amount of volume of waste that is going into it. So while I say that because as I'll explain more fully, with the long haul option, we have the opportunity of reducing the overall cost as we reduce the volume of waste. That option does not exist in the same way with a long-term RF contract because of the fixed costs for operating that system. You do not realize the same benefits as you reduce the volumes going into it. Next slide, please. So a question we are obviously know is really important to the county to understand very clearly is what do those costs mean for rates, for ratepayers. So we have estimates of what that looks like here on the slide before you. So to break this down for you, as I said, the option for executing our system via long haul to a landfill is actually less expensive over time. You see that as the green line on this slide before you. And in the long term, it is much less expensive. Contrast that with the RRF. You can see shown here on the orange line, because of the payments involved and the debt service payments that would be required on the capital projects that would be needed to maintain the RRF over time, it becomes a much more expensive option. And while this slide only goes out to FY31, you can also picture these lines extending onwards. So as I mentioned, if we reduce the volumes of waste, which would be possible in the green line, that green line will go down. If we reduce volumes of waste on the RRF, the orange line would not go down because we would need to maintain that system. So this gives you a sense of what we're looking at in terms of the dollars on the previous slide and how they translate into rates and how those rates would play out over time. I want to note, you may note that there is a jump in the green line for FY27 and 28. That's because there's transition costs, and the county is intending to have overlap between the two systems as we make the change. It's not the type of change where you can have one in place until Tuesday and then switch to the new system on Wednesday. There would be a time frame we would expect to have both systems in place to ensure a flawless transition, but that would mean cost for both of those systems at that time. So that's what's represented in FY27. Next slide, please. We've talked about this before, but I want to highlight a few of the benefits of this transition. Number one, at the risk of stating the obvious, is the lower cost. Overall, long haul is less expensive when compared to the resource recovery facilities costs when you account for the systems upgrades that would be needed. Number two, but very importantly, I mentioned the carrying costs of infrastructure associated with maintaining equipment. Long haul does not involve those significant capital investments, and therefore it frees up options that we could integrate into our waste system by not having to sink that same amount of money into the resource recovery facility. It opens up alternative solutions such as the advanced waste processing technologies I mentioned earlier. And so it's important to understand that when we talk about these, obviously you all understand acutely how tight our budgets are in this county and how many conflicting priorities there are for it. So essentially, with the dollars involved that would be required to upgrade the resource recovery facility were to be extended out for a long period of time, that would take significant amounts of capital that essentially would not be available for other more innovative uses and other technologies and systems that we would otherwise have the option of integrating into our system. There's a number of other benefits listed on this slide. I won't go through all of them in turn, but suffice it to say, we understand in the county there's a number of benefits available, but the three I highlighted for you just now: cost, flexibility, and the opportunity to add in other technologies down the road are chief among them. And I'll talk through some of these a little bit further too. Next slide, please. Something that I think as policymakers you are all also very aware of, there's no silver bullet here. No system is going to be flawless, and there are trade-offs involved with both systems, whether we're talking about long haul or whether we're talking about the resource recovery facility. I want to underscore, as you see at the bottom of the slide, both of these options rely on third-party management of our waste. So right now, as was noted, we send the ash from the RRF out of county to a landfill. Similarly, if we were to switch to a long haul scenario, we would be sending 100% of the county's waste that's left over at the end of all of our recycling programs would be disposed of at a landfill. So, but either way, we're sending that material to a landfill, and we're doing that right now. And as was noted earlier by Chair Glass, we also, and I'll talk about more on a subsequent slide, we have the opportunity to, and we will, center equity and environmental justice considerations as we make this transition. But we have the option to revisit and evaluate the types of landfills that would be receiving our waste in this process. I want to also note that the first bulleted bullet on this slide, air emissions, both landfills and waste-to-energy facilities emit greenhouse gas emissions. The analysis that the county conducted found that a landfilling scenario actually had slightly lower emissions than a waste-to-energy facility, and it's important to note that waste-to-energy facility also emit non-greenhouse gases, as was noted by Chair Glass. So these are some of the considerations that are important to keep in mind when we're talking about our MSW. It's also important to note here when we talk about noise and traffic that under either scenario, operations at the transfer station would continue. It's an important resource for the county that allows residents to access a centrally located facility, as well as our haulers. And as noted here, the county is currently conducting a traffic study which will evaluate the impact of long haul from the transfer station to an out-of-county landfill. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you've all seen this before, but and there's a lot of information on this, but just to be really clear about the takeaways from this slide, as I said at the start of my remarks, these procurements take time and these transitions take time. And what we don't want to do is run out of time. So this slide lays out the operative timelines, and we as a county will obviously need to move forward expeditiously well before we are at or near the end of the current contract, which is represented by the dotted red line on this slide. But it's important to note that the two alternative scenarios available to the county right now, long haul to a landfill or long-term operation of the RRF, involves significant amounts of time, both for the procurement process and for the implementation of the contracts that would be selected from that procurement process. Those are laid out here. You're looking at a minimum of 12 months for long haul, a longer amount of time, 30 months for an RRF extension. So when you add in those timelines, you can see how the amount of time we have, quote unquote, remaining is actually not that much time. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about this in July of 2025? We're talking about it for a number of reasons, and this timeline lays out the aggressive timelines needed to make this transition as early as possible. But I want to start with why we're actually pushing this conversation in a way that centers it on our busy calendars and your busy agenda. For obvious reasons, the county has better leverage in negotiations if we're not up against a deadline. I think that's pretty intuitive. But something we heard a lot during the budget process from all of you and others was a concern around spending funds on a system that we are actively transitioning away from. So the sooner we move forward with this transition, the more we can avoid spending money on a system we are moving away from. And there's a potential to avoid costs associated with those projects. And number three, this is something that's on a more operational note, but you'll see it listed here as the second bullet. This leaves room for contingencies. This is a complex system. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of materials. It's very important that we give ourselves time to make sure that from the end user perspective, the customer, the businesses, the residents, that there's no visible change in service of any kind from their perspective. We don't want people to experience any disruption in service, obviously, associated with this change. So it's really important that we're not doing this in a way that could lead to any disruption of service. So leaving room for contingencies is extremely important as well. The two green boxes at the top lay out the timelines, the aggressive timelines that would allow us to move forward and make this transition as quickly as possible. And you can see how those differ between the two options we have. The box on the left is laid out for the timeline for long haul landfill. The box on the right would be the timeline for a long-term RRF extension. And you can see how with the transition to landfill and the green box in the top left corner, we're able to move forward much more quickly. And the difference there is that difference between 12 months for procurement and implementation of a long haul contract versus 30 months for the RRF extension. And so you see that's the difference laid out in these two side-by-side boxes here. Either way, we're not talking about something that happens overnight. Next slide, please. A question that had come up throughout this conversation was just how this relates to the solid waste management plan. And this lays out that it's not an immediate item for this body. The solid waste management plan does not need to be updated in advance of switching to long haul. It would be updated as it is on a regular schedule to reflect the transition. And that's something we've confirmed with the Maryland Department of the Environment, and we've shared information in writing with council on that as well. Next slide, please. So to bring us back to where we are and how we're going to think about this process moving forward, there's a lot of very important information that the county is going to acquire through the procurement process. We know that you have a lot of questions and your team has a lot of questions. So this slide lays out really the framework for the procurement process and the data points that the county will be getting back from companies interested in doing this work for the county. So to illustrate some of these that are laid out on the slide here, number one, obviously cost. The slides you saw earlier are estimates of costs. Until we get the request for proposals back to the county, we won't actually have fixed cost information as represented by those companies. So number one, that's why that's listed first. Very important, obviously. I talked about environment and social justice, but we'll certainly be looking at those proposals with respect to environmental justice, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide, which is dedicated to this important topic. But things that we'll be looking at include the location of landfills, how far away they are for purposes of transportation, the environmental compliance of those sites, all very important considerations. We'll also be looking at greenhouse gas emissions associated with what is being proposed back to us from those companies, as well as diversion of waste away from the transfer station. As you may all know, right now we receive almost all of the county's waste centrally at the transfer station in Durwood before it is sent out. We have the possibility to actually bypass our own transfer station potentially, and that would allow us to free up capacity at a site that is stretched very thin right now. So that's an important consideration as well. So there's a number of other considerations, but those are the key ones I wanted to draw your attention to most immediately. And again, putting out a request for proposal will allow us to get all of this information back. We don't have it right now. So we know these are important considerations, and we wanted you to have a sense of the key considerations that are going to be centered as a part of this process moving forward. So a lot more to come on all these, if I were to summarize. Next slide, please. So this is obviously a very important topic, which will continue to center in the process going forward, but we will be assessing the environmental justice implications of all of the long-haul proposals the county gets back. As was mentioned, we currently dispose of our ash at a landfill in Virginia. We would request that proposals back to the county for long hauling our waste identify one or more regional landfills so that we have the ability to assess those landfills and understand how the proposed host communities may be disadvantaged or overburdened by environmental impacts and health impacts. So this will very much be an important part of how we review the proposals we get back from companies. And it's important to note, as is listed here on the slide, that obviously we expect the proposals we receive back to be proposing landfills that are number one in the region, and number two have existing capacity, i.e. they have the space. Next slide, please. So what happens next? What happens now? As I mentioned, there's no decision before the body today, but we wanted to make sure you had a very clear sense of the timeline and path moving forward. So obviously we have today's briefing. The department is planning to issue the RFP I mentioned for long haul to landfill in the coming months. We would then get all of those key data points and information back by December or January, at which point we will plan on returning to the council to offer another briefing as you wish, so that you would have a sense. I basically just laid out all the things we need to know. Those are the things we will know once we get the responses back in December or January. At that point, we will return to the council. Again, we're in the effort to meet you all in a calendar that is outside of the budget process, so you understand those key data points, all of that information and implications, both prior to award of the contract, but also obviously prior to the budget process, which would take place next spring. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions and receive any feedback. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Monger, and to the whole team. I'm going to kick it off and then turn it over to Councilmember Glass first, and then our colleagues. First, I just want to dig in a little bit more on the environmental justice piece of this, and I appreciate that you had the slide up here on that, but can you go a little bit more in depth on how basically right now people evaluate landfills on environmental justice in the communities right now? And also, was there ever a consideration of finding an area for a landfill in the county?
Sure. So I'm gonna ask my colleague Kelly Lolliker, who's Chief of Zero Waste Programs for the department, to elaborate here. With respect to the second part of your question, Council Member, there is a site in the county which is permitted for landfilling. However, when we talked about the amount of volumes and operations involved here, it's important to note that we're talking about very long-term timelines, and one of the key pieces to understand when we're talking about all these options is capacity and how long they will last. So for a variety of reasons, we don't think that there is a significant amount of capacity available in county. Ergo, any investment that could be made would be a short-term investment, and we would still need to be considering the types of options we're talking about today out of county. But I'll allow Kaylee to elaborate on the types of criteria which landfills are measured against on this important subject.
Sure. So there's actually an example of how this can work in the Arcadis report, and so. What they do basically is once you know the location of the landfill, there are tools out there. The one that Arcadis used was EPA's EJ screen, and you can input the location of the landfill, and the map is sort of preloaded with all of these data sets for different screening criteria. And if you look on the slide 14, these are some examples that would be relevant for waste type activities. And so you can look at the location and determine what that community around that location's existing burden for these criteria are. And so the tool will give you a percentile ranking for that community relative to either the state or the country. And so the way that Arcadis did it was they looked at what is that community over the 50th percentile for that indicator in the country. So is it more impacted by that indicator than your average community in the U.S.? And so that's how they did the EJ assessment. And you can see that there are environmental indicators, there are socioeconomic indicators, and then there are also health indicators. So the point is to determine the degree to which that community is already overburdened by certain environmental or health impacts, or is disproportionately represented in these socioeconomic indicators, in the hopes that you can avoid selecting a community that's already impacted by those indicators. So in Arcadis's analysis, they actually looked at a selection of landfills in the region. I think they looked at 10 different landfills in Virginia and Pennsylvania. And what they found is that there are landfills in the region that have fewer indicators that are over the 50th percentile than the Old Dominion landfill that currently receives our ash. So I think what that shows is that we have an opportunity if we were to shift to long haul to select a host landfill with that in mind, and looking for a landfill that would hopefully reduce the impact of our waste activities on a community that's already overburdened.
And in this, are we also thinking that we would shift our ash to the same facility, depending on the RFPs we get back, or?
So if we were going to shift to long haul, then obviously it would just be, MSW that we would be transporting. There wouldn't be any ash that we would have to transport. If we were to go with the option of doing a longer term RRF contract, we could also do the same thing in that scenario, in that RFP process.
I was thinking about the transitional period, because I think in one of the slides, we'll probably be doing both for a bit of time, but not that, yeah.
That's correct. It will likely be as brief of amount of time as possible, given the costs associated with carrying two systems simultaneously. So, we could certainly look at making that switch as soon as possible, but the goal of transitioning away from the system, as Kaylee mentioned, would be to essentially not have any ash coming out of the RF.
Great, thank you. I know a number of colleagues have questions. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Glass first.
Thank you again, Madam President. Appreciate the presentation and the focus on substantive conversations outside of the budget when we can all digest this and have continued dialogue. And so that's what you're affording us now, recognizing that the T&E committee will have even deeper dives, and then as the council president wishes, schedule more full council conversations. I just want to take a step back and get a sense from the department, their thinking, and clearly it's the thinking of the county executive, as to how the different priorities are to be measured. There is the environmental justice, there's the social justice, there's the cost, there's the capacity. As we are looking at all of these different options, each with different levels of those considerations, where do you start this process? And I want to back up a little bit and say that it was just a few months ago during the budget process that we were told we needed to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a new facility. And so clearly that's no longer the path forward. And so share with us what the county executive's priorities are as we more formally begin this process.
Thanks for the question. So, I want to underscore, just starting with the last part of your question, that we very much have the option of adding advanced waste processing technologies into our system. And it's important to note that the option of diverting significant amounts of waste and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is an option that is very much available to the county by virtue of making the transition to long haul. As I stated, because of the capital costs associated with upgrading the resource recovery facility, it's not financially viable to upgrade that facility and simultaneously add advanced waste processing technologies. However, given the cost savings available to the county by virtue of switching to long haul, we do have the option of adding those advanced waste processing technologies in. So one of the benefits of switching to long haul is that flexibility. So I think that's an important piece of the conversation to be retained moving forward. The distinction that I think is also important to remember, however, council members, that because of the timelines involved, that's option number 3, not option number 1 or 2, in that it's not available to the county in the time frame that we need to be talking about most immediately between now and 2031. So I think a lot of the issues and criteria you raised are laid out on slide 13 when we talk about what types of information the county will learn during the procurement process, which will allow us to make an informed decision moving forward. So things that we're going to need to consider as a county, obviously the total cost of service, year for year, but also long term. The environmental and social justice impact of the offers proposal, and my colleague Kaylee walked through how we can go about making that evaluation. Number 3, we're going to also have to consider the greenhouse gas emissions in total associated with any proposal that we have to understand the life cycle emissions of those and all the emissions associated with different parts of that system. And lastly, I think I'll end with where I started, which was, the goal here is to have less trash. And so I think at each time we make a decision as a county, we need to keep in mind how our choices do or do not allow us to have less waste as a county. So to put today's context in conversation, we're talking about the things that are left over after all of our recycling programs, after all of our outreach efforts, after all composting. This is we're talking about what you do with what's known as residuals, the things that are always going to be left in the waste stream. We actually have the ability through advanced waste processing technologies to actually sort our waste stream and pull out things that have value. So I think diversion needs to be an important part of this conversation, because the technologies that are now available that we're seeing come online both here and abroad actually allow us to do things that really haven't been done historically.
I'm glad you brought back up that slide, and it sounds like the administration is keeping all options open so that you can have a full conversation and digest all the information from that RFP. Because some people might start the conversation by saying this a particular facility needs to be closed, everything else would be better. Others might say that cost is the most important factor that they want to look at, while yet others might look at total carbon emissions. And you've articulated that. I think keeping all options open and making a data-driven decision, and also understanding the budget realities as they interplay is probably the best strategy to move forward, because I'll end on the same note you just concluded with, Director. We need to improve our waste management. We need to reduce the number of metric tons that are collected, and all of these efforts combined will help us reach that goal. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the presentation and look forward to more committee conversations. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And while this is a county-wide issue, there is one council member for whose district is impacted more than others, and I'll turn it over to Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. For once, I wasn't even thinking about that, but coming from the T&E perspective, so I just so appreciate that, Council President, that we're having this as a full council discussion, because while the T&E committee has been working on this for a while, this is a decision, it's a 30-year decision or more. And so it's a decision that when the county decides what we're going to do with our trash, this is a full council, county executive, departmental decision that we're, from a budgetary perspective, that we're going to have to go through. So I appreciate that, and of course to Chair Glass for his efforts in making sure that this is a council-wide decision. The jurisdictional piece that the council has, I want to make that clear. So I think that what's important, and we'll remember everything that you said, so remember the thing that I'm going to say is that rates are going to go up. Rates are going to go up every year, and we need to make sure that our community knows that, our residents know that this, it was a very difficult decision during last year's budget, a difficult discussion to have. And I really appreciate that we're having this discussion outside of the budget, because this is one of hundreds of decisions that we make during the budget, and it's too big of a decision to make during the pressure of the budget and trying to keep taxes and fees as low as we possibly can, which is important from a cost perspective. But I just want to let people know that this will have an impact on our residents, and we need to continually repeat that so our residents aren't shocked after the decision's made that rates will go up. So I wanted to mention that. And I did want to just confirm that the rates for the RRF are net of any revenues from energy generation, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And then, so I'm all for moving forward on the RFP. We will have so much more information after we get the proposals in than we have now. So this is a briefing, no decisions being made because we really need that information from the proposals. So that's important. Couple of the concerns that I have about long haul, and I've said this many times in my community and in our conversations, is where, I'll talk about that for a minute, but also how, okay? Truck hauling, we really need to look at that transportation study in terms of the capacity for how we get that much trash in and out of the transfer station. And if that isn't going to be the solution, where are we sorting this trash and how are we moving it? How many trucks, what roads are the trucks going on? I think that's very important for the entire community to be aware of. So that's important. And then the other piece is where, where is this trash going to? And I know that we'll have, again, more information with the RFP, but when we talk about environmental justice and that decision tree, I think to me, one of the important aspects of the community that we're sending our trash to is whether that community has a voice or not. I mean, we can look at their demographics and we can look at the environmental aspect, but we really need to think about whether that community has a voice in this decision. And I think that for many communities who have been just historically marginalized, that will be an important factor for me. The idea of shipping our trash someplace else is a very big decision, and I don't think anyone here is going to take that decision lightly. And from the perspective of our site, our landfill site, which is in District 2, along with the incinerator, the fact that it and I understand the capacity issue that site will not be able to sustain the amount of trash for a long term, which means that we have a lot of trash, and so I don't think anybody's going to take that decision lightly about where the trash is going to go. And so those are just my initial thoughts. And then also, I did have a question about the MRBT, but that's still potentially out there, but that decision's not coming to us for a long time. Is that correct?
Councilmember, I just want to start by saying thank you for your leadership on this issue. It's obviously an important issue for the full council, but particularly appreciate your attention to the issue. And so a couple reactions to your thoughts and your question. We do have the ability to start concurrently looking at how we can add advanced waste processing technologies into the county's system. So, like I said, that only makes sense financially and operationally if we are going to be transitioning to long haul. It wouldn't make financial operational sense to add that on while we have an incinerator in place. So that's not something we necessarily need to wait on. And our recommendation is that we concurrently look at how we can do both of those things. The reason it's not where we started in today's conversation is because, we also need to make sure that there's that back end system in place for processing everything that's left. So we don't need to wait to look at how we can add those in. However, the decision about what happens to the final volume of residual waste is inextricably linked, given only one of them would allow us to add those only long hauling would allow us to add those technologies in, essentially. And then I just want to note to your point about the how. It's a very important point, and I mentioned one of the benefits of switching to long haul, and one of the reasons that is unequivocally the recommendation being made today to this body is that it does allow flexibility. And if we switch to long haul by truck in the near term, we would have one flexibility that would exist is we could also switch to long haul down the road by rail. Maybe down the road isn't the right reference in that statement. Down the rail by rail, which would allow us to reduce the emissions associated with the system significantly. It takes even more operational lead time when you're talking about acquiring rail stock and adjusting rail yards, but that's the flexibility that would exist. That would be a relatively near-term flexibility that would allow us to reduce the emissions from the system significantly. Again, that flexibility does not exist if you are operating a waste-to-energy facility.
Thank you. And I do want to just underscore that this is the trash that's left over from everything else that we do. So for me, I'm really want to see the curbside composting move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Member.
Great, thank you. Council Vice President Joando.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your service. And if we don't see you again before the full council, wish you all the best. Thank you. I know you'll stay engaged in the work. Following up, to be additive, I really appreciate Councilmember Balcom's question on the environmental justice aspect of where we would be shipping this, and the Council President. The question I have on that is, you said fewer indicators, and you mentioned what some of those are. I'm assuming that you have a sense of, because we're not going to ship it to California, right? So it has to be regional. So there's a defined number of opportunities. Do you have a sense of what those opportunities are? I think you do, because you said you've looked at places and where they are. Could you give me how long is the list? How big is the universe?
Yeah, so Arcadis looked at approximately 10 other landfills besides Old Dominion, which is where we currently send the ash, and those are all located in either Virginia or Pennsylvania, and that represents sort of a good sense of how many landfills in the region there are that are currently accepting waste, in enough quantities that we could reasonably use them. So that was sort of how Arcadis selected the ones that they looked at.
And that was going to be my second question. So all 10 of those would have capacity?
Yes, as far as we know. I mean, again, like in order to actually execute a contract to send waste there, it would need to go through the RFP process. Sure. But we did sort of weed out any that were not accepting waste currently. And
when you say fewer indicators, by a lot, by a little, is there a place where we can? Is that all in the report, or it is in the report? Okay. Yeah. So I don't have that off the top of my head, but they looked at about 11 indicators, I think it was, and the Old Dominion landfill, just for comparison, exceeded the 50th percentile for 9 of the 11. All of the others exceeded the 50th percentile for at least one of the indicators, but fewer than that 9. So, that suggests there are better options out there. Right. So somewhere in the mix there. And it lists the names, the actual locations in the report, yes. Right? Okay, yep. Good. Because I think Councilmember Balcom's point about the people who do our job in those places, the laws of the state Commonwealth of Virginia and Pennsylvania, their ability to have a voice, those are big factors that I think we're going to weigh for me as well, and I think, as you've heard from other colleagues. So I'll look into that. I'll have a lot more questions, but I appreciate you laying that up. The other question I had was just around the cost savings. I looked at that chart. So in FY27 and 28, it goes up but then it drops down precipitously. Could you just talk, so the rates would go up under this, a big jump in 27 if we went forward with long haul, but then they would start to drop for how long past, would they keep dropping past 31? I guess it depends on what we do, but could you just talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So we're talking about the chart on slide 7 for those who are following along, and as I said earlier, the reason for the initial increase would just be for the transition period. Again, to use the car analogy, if you have 2 cars, you're paying for 2 cars. Once if you're making the switch and then you get rid of the old one, then you're only paying for the new one. So for that period in which we would have the transition underway, we would need to have carrying costs of both of those systems.
And that's why it's the higher cost.
Correct. Okay. So that's what you see essentially with here. I'll add, these are conservative estimates, so which will be verified once we get the responses back from the proposals. But our hope and expectation is that what you would see here would be not as high of a peak as what's shown here, but we want to be conservative in these estimates. To the second part of your question with what happens later, obviously an important question. One of the pieces I mentioned with respect to why the clear recommendation is to switch to long haul is because it does allow us flexibility, i.e. the way the payment structured is associated with long hauls, you pay for how much you're sending. Just like if you're going to the FedEx store, the more you ship, the more you pay. That's not the case when you're operating an RRF that has fixed costs. And so I say that because the green line, in addition to having lower annual costs, number one, which is important, and that's what's shown on slide 6, by definition, any reduction in volumes that we can achieve, for example, by adding in advanced waste processing systems, adding in composting, would allow us to have a lower volume and then realize savings from that lower volume. There's no financial incentive to reduce your volume when you're paying the same amount, no matter how much you put into it.
And this doesn't factor that in, or does it?
I see. Yes.
Do these declining prices factor in that there's less trash?
No, these are assuming
continued
of our current.
So it could go lower if we process in different ways, but obviously there's a cost to process in different ways.
It could and it should, right? And we have a great record in this county of reducing, even in a period of significant population growth, reducing the per capita amount of waste per person. And we're really proud of that record, and it's one that we can and should continue. When we switch to long haul, we will save money in addition, by virtue of reducing those per capita volumes.
I appreciate that. Well, I can say from when I joined the council in 2018, we didn't all have water bottles then. A lot of us had plastic water bottles, and and while occasionally we use them, but for the most part, I think everyone up here has a water bottle. So it's one of the examples. I appreciate that. Last thing I'll just say is, this makes sense if we're sending it to a place that the EJ concerns that we talked about, that where there is not it's not being imposed on somebody. It's not going to really ruin their lives and their community. So that's a big if, and a lot of information there. I'm glad that you think that it can be done potentially, and that we can continue to reduce our output through other processing. I like that piece of it, and I like that prices go down even though there's a big jump. So all positive initial signs. We obviously a lot of details here, but appreciate that we're having this session and all your work on it. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you for this briefing. I think it would be very fair to say that the last time you were here, I was extremely concerned about that briefing. I really was during budget. I think this RFP makes a whole lot of sense, and because we need to get the most information we possibly can, and this is the way to go about that. It was brought up about the county landfills, and I remember two, one on Goody, and then one in Laytonsville, and both had problems associated with both. Goody certainly had methane gas that came back. Laytonsville, it was groundwater, and they needed to put a plastic liner in, and that was a huge controversy. And because so many of the people in that area are on well and septic. And then there was the concerns about the bird droppings, about what it was doing and to the neighborhoods and to the area itself. I remember going down to Virginia Beach and seeing Mount Trashmore. I mean, this is not an easy thing to solve, but one thing's for certain: we're going to need to do something about trash, because that's not going to go away, even if we're very efficient. Right now, because and Councilmember Balcom certainly touched on this, but right now, because of the rail at Shady Grove, in the transfer station there, would there be a possibility in this discussion that you would still be using rail in some way?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. The short answer is yes, absolutely. Rail could and should be a part of the conversation going forward. As I mentioned earlier, it allows us to potentially significantly reduce the amount of emissions associated with transferring waste. The county has invested in a rail system which we currently operate between our sites. So there's absolutely space for that to be a part of the conversation, and there's benefits involved. As I also mentioned earlier, however, the amount of time involved for rail transition is longer due to the timelines associated with ordering the necessary types of stock. There's different requirements on different segments of rail, so the lead time is longer on rail, but it should absolutely be under long-term consideration for the county as part of our options.
And right now, there's many the regular size trash trucks that go to Shady Grove, to the transfer station. I mean, I don't know how many go every day, but obviously there's many that go there. How many, and to Councilmember Balcom's question again, if we do the long haul, and that certainly seems like that could be something that should be considered. If we do the long haul, where would, in this RFP, would they say where what size truck that would have to be, where that truck would have to drive, where it would end up? Would all of that be in that discussion?
Yes.
And the only other thing I have is that I think that we need to get as much information as we can, as quickly as we can, because this is not going to be a problem that goes away ever. And if we can come up with the better solution, then I think we need to do that as quickly as we can. But I think your timeline is one that's fair. And the only other question is about the RFP. How is that going to be written? What kind of questions are going to be asked, and will we see those questions prior to you soliciting for it?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Council Member. So that's what's laid out on slide 13 of this presentation. So we understand that you all want to understand further the types of information we'll get back. So everything laid out on slide 13 are essentially the questions to which we will receive an answer during the RFP process. And the bottom 2/3 of the page is essentially what will allow the county to make a decision based on all the points you see here.
Thank you very much.
Bless you.
Thank you, and I yield back. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Director Maunder and your team for taking your time to bring everything together and for your discussions with me and my team. I've said before that I don't like making our trash other people's problems. But again, our trash is in fact a core function of county government to provide, making sure that we have adequate and appropriate services in place to handle our waste management. But I'm worried that long haul landfilling may be the wrong choice in terms of costs, the long-term cost to our residents, the environmental impacts, the overall management strategy for the trash, and from a moral perspective. And I appreciate everyone raising the things that we do need to do better on, and thank you about the curbside composting, right? That's being asked for all over the place. Because we do have to do that. I don't know that that's something that the general public views in terms of, as you mentioned, there's not a financial incentive on the one, if you have the RRF versus the long haul. I don't know that it's habit forming, and it's because it's the right thing to do for the environment. I don't know that the general public says, oh, you know what, I compost because I have some financial benefit from it. They would not even be able to quantify that, right? But what they do know is that by taking into consideration a behavioral change, they are in fact making a difference about what goes into our waste stream. And I certainly appreciate the promises that were made to the Dickerson community and why they want the incinerator to be closed. Frankly, folks there didn't want the incinerator in the first place. But I also represent the area with the transfer station, right? And Councilmember Katz raised two of our landfills that both Goody and Laytonsville that also are, in my district, or were in my district. But they have had significant growth around the transfer station as well. So in terms of the types of impacts that we're talking about, whether it's rail or whether it's hauled away via truck, those are both significant impacts to the West Side Shady Grove neighborhood, for example, toward the other transit-oriented development projects that we have going on inside the Shady Grove sector plan. And they are literally next door neighbors with the transfer station. And they call us, because trash flies off the trucks or something's wrong, or, the trucks are noisy, or they're queued up and down Shady Grove Road waiting to get in. But they also understand they have to do their part too, and they are. But we need to know better what the impacts are for that community as well, because as noted in the Arcadis report, that community also ticks off several of the RESJ factors. And that's something that I'm very concerned about. Because as I noted in a prior discussion, I grew up in an area where there was a now shut down landfill, where that was significant. And I note that we talked about the hauling of the ash that currently gets hauled and then the material solid waste that would be hauled in totality. Those are two very different quantities and two very different things, right? Because material solid waste does emit landfill gases, correct?
So first of all, Councilmember, thank you, because I really appreciate not only your attention on this issue, but you speaking from your experience both here and previously. So yes, as noted in the presentation, landfills do implement capture technologies to prevent as many emissions as possible, but they're not perfect. We have an ability to measure and score different operations to understand how well managed they are prior to making a choice about where waste would be going.
Right. And so while there are technologies that are in place and have evolved over time to help capture as much of that landfill gas as possible, it is in fact true that the ash that currently gets landfilled by the county out of state in Virginia does not emit landfill gas. However, material solid waste does. So there isn't anything to be captured in the landfill now by those remediation systems, but there would be with the long haul material solid waste transport. And in fact, it cannot capture all of it. Right.
Yeah, the systems are not 100% efficient. the ash also requires management.
Sure.
So the way I would frame it is the two different materials, which, as you said correctly, by nature, by volume, by weight, are very different. They both require very specific handling on the other end, but the processes and handling of them are different by virtue of what they are.
I think it would be helpful for everyone to have a clearer understanding of that in a deeper, more technical way. It is true, as Councilmember Katz referenced, you could smell landfill gases, right? And again, back in the 80s, they weren't captured that well. Now it's captured better. But again, it depends on the time of the year as to how much you notice the landfill gases. We're in the heart of landfill gas notice season right now, right? When it's warmer, it's much easier to detect. But I think it's helpful for everyone to understand the nuances and the distinctions between how those two different streams are managed and what those impacts are to when it goes to a landfill. Thank you all for explaining the variety of different landfills that were considered in the Arcadis report, and that those were all facilities that are in fact currently accepting. My question is, how long? Because these facilities get taken offline, right? So how long do we know? Is there variability between the facilities that were included in the Arcadis report? So that would be helpful for you to be able to come back to us with. Sorry, I write on my papers sideways, so sometimes I have a hard time figuring out what I meant. I know, you noted that there were fixed costs with respect to the RRF system, which because the county has operated it for so long and sort of knows the overall scope of things, those are more certain fixed costs, correct? But the rates are right now estimates is the greatest way we can categorize them, right?
So we have a very clear understanding of the operational upgrades which would be necessary at the RRF by virtue of the fact that we've been operating it and we've been working very closely with the contractors on site for many years. The county also commissioned several years ago a full facility condition assessment of the RRF. So the estimates for the dollars that would be required to upgrade that facility, we have a lot of certainty behind. The pieces that we have less certainty behind would be actually on the long haul piece, just because those are in fact based on estimates, but by virtue of the procurement process that's underway, we'll get more certain information back. But we do have a very clear picture of the costs associated of what would be required to bring the RRF to a place where it could operate long-term successfully based on the assessments that have been done to date.
Okay. And thank you for answering Councilmember Katz's questions about can we see the questions that are going to go into the RFP before it goes out, because I think that is important. I think probably everyone up here has some thoughts or wants to be able to see them. But one of my concerns is, you're right, you do have to anticipate RFP processes and contract expirations appropriately, because these do take time and they always take longer than what the estimate is for completing. It's the way of government procurement. That being said, the deadline of the RRF contract expiring didn't exactly sneak up on the executive branch, right? I mean, it was a date certain because it was in the contract. And so now it kind of feels like everything's happening very quickly, with a hurry up and rush. And yet there are a lot of details that need to be fleshed out before we could make appropriate decisions where we can feel comfortable with what we're doing and understanding the fiscal impacts, the operational impacts, the roadway impacts, and or time to rail service impacts, and the very real equity issues at play. And so I'm assuming that means we can't really do this until after we've gotten the RFP out, we can determine if we are engaged in an apples to apples comparisons or not. We understand how many years you can bargain for in terms of fixed costs, because those costs are really important. And knowing how long of a runway you have with them locked in is also critically important to us in our long-term budget strategies. And then, I also have a little worry that, do the vendors have an upper hand right now, because we've been showing all our cards, frankly. And I worry about that, right? Because I don't feel like that's the best place for us to be in as negotiators. And I think we need to tread carefully and cautiously with that, and make sure that we are, in fact, doing our best possible job to protect the county's interests, the residents' interests, and our long-term fiscal health in what we do moving forward. The last question is, will anything going in the RFP include protections against having to expand or increase capacity at the Shady Grove Transfer Station?
Thanks, Council Member. So one of the things that the county will learn through the procurement process is whether we have the opportunity to actually, instead of expand, reduce the amount of volumes that are coming into the transfer station. As you're well aware, it's a pretty tight facility. There's a lot happening there. It's very busy, and we have significant volumes coming in and out. So I think that's one of the appeals here is that we can look at going forward, is that we understand that we have the option in a long haul scenario that we do not have now, where a fraction of the waste could actually just not come to our transfer station at all in this process, which would alleviate pressure on our system.
Okay, and it's possible I missed it, but I know you referenced that MDE, Maryland, sorry, I want to make sure I don't use acronyms, the Maryland Department of the Environment authorized in April that you would not need to do an amendment to the solid waste plan. Do you have a copy of that? Was it in the packet? Because I couldn't find it.
Yeah, happy to share that in writing. We do just to clarify, the plan would be amended.
Okay.
It would be amended. It could be amended, however, in cycle after the fact. It wouldn't need to take place prior.
Okay.
And happy to share that. We have engaged closely with MDE on that.
Yeah, that would
have
be
in
great
writing.
if we could all make sure we've
Yep.
seen the wording of that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's on slide 12 of the slide deck, but we are happy to share more information as follow-up as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate this conversation. It's a much better one than the last time we had it, so glad to do that. I do think it's good that we're having the conversation, but it is like 6 years overdue. And that's not your fault, but it is, I think, frustrating for all of us. And I think it is why the last conversation was such a challenge. And the reset here is so important. But, we are where we are. And now the question is, how do we move forward? My main question is understanding at what point the short-term and the long-term decisions are made. I mean, today we've shifted completely this conversation. In the spring, it felt like, back against the wall, absolutely no choices here. We have to make a decision for the next 30 years, and we have to do it now. And there are no other options. Today, we're here saying, actually, we're going to go out, do an RFP, see what options there are out there, get a response back, and that will essentially buy us time to be in a position to make a decision to potentially, at some point, that's not clear to me, make a decision to transition to a completely new system and a completely new process. So I'm just trying to understand, what changed in terms of the strategy and the approach, why it took so long for us to get to this point. And then at what point, assuming the RFP comes back and this direction is decided, and there are major environmental justice, cost, dynamics for us to weigh and decide, as you've heard from colleagues, and we're going to have to make those decisions come January, whenever we are back having this conversation, whatever forum that looks like. But the second piece that I'm just still not clear about is, what do we do then? What is the choice then? We've talked now about how that allows us the possibility and the opportunity and the option, which seems pretty open-ended to me, and there isn't a lot of clarity to understand at what point is that choice being made, and is there a position and a preference of the executive and the executive branch of what direction we're going in, or at least a process and a timeline moving forward for that aspect. Because it seems like, to me, the decision that we're making here and the process that we're moving forward with is a process that gives, that makes one choice. We're ending something and we're transitioning to something else, but that something else is being framed as really a temporary solution, a less than ideal but perhaps preferred alternative that transitions to something else. The question is, when does that transition take place? When do those choices get made? And when will we have an understanding of what that looks like?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. So in terms of the timeline, I'll give you two. So one is laid out on slide 15, which is the next steps going forward. The timeline going forward and what that means for this body is, as I mentioned, we will send out the RFP for long haul in the coming 2 months. Those responses we would expect back in January. We would then have the opportunity to come back to this council with the with the benefit of information obtained through that process that we've been talking about today. The purpose of doing of moving forward on this schedule is, again, so that we as a county have that information not during the budget cycle, but before and separate, so that we would have the chance, and this is noted on the bottom of slide 15, to have that conversation in January prior to deliberation on the budget that spring. Obviously, that's the funding for the MSW system is a big part of our budget, and it would be finalized in the budget process in spring of next year. The purpose of the timeline moving forward and why we're here with you today is so that we can have these conversations sooner. To your question about sort of the overarching timelines, however, and putting this conversation in context. So, and this is laid out on the multicolored slide. I believe it's slide 10, the timeline. But just given the reason why I'm grateful for the council president scheduling this session today is that, given the long amount of times involved in not just executing the procurement around these, but then implementing the contracts which come out of those procurement, although we have, quote unquote, until 2031, as you can see laid out on slide 10, just given that the procurement associated with long haul is 12 months, the procurement associated with an RF extension is 30 months, you start subtracting those time frames back from the deadline, and we don't have that much time. The blue dotted line on this slide represents the very last possible date, at which point the county would retain two options, because at some point, if you wait long enough, you're only down to the one you can do in the shortest amount of time. So all that's a way of saying, the purpose of having the conversation today, so that you know what's coming, and then also that we'll be able to come back to you once we have the benefit of knowledge of all the data points that will come back in the proposals, which aligns with the good questions you all have been asking, is to get as much information for the county, so you know the very specific implications of this change outside of the budget process. And I just want to reiterate something I said earlier, which the unequivocal recommendation that's being made today is to move forward with transitioning away from our current system for all the reasons that are laid out in this presentation. And this is the process to do so. However, to go back to where I started at the start of my remarks, we heard you loud and clear during the budget process, and our goal and commitment to you going forward is to be sharing information proactively and actively with you all outside of the budget process, so we don't get to those conversations in the spring and there's any element of surprise.
Appreciate it. So 2 more questions related to timeline. The 180 days, do we think that is a reasonable amount of time for the transition? I mean, I understand there's a notice requirement, but taking away the legal contractual requirements, is the 180-day transition period a satisfactory period in order to ensure that there's no disruption of services? Because obviously this is among the more basic functions of county government.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important question. Our expectation is yes, but that's also something that we will be able to assess in a very specific way upon reviewing responses.
Okay, and then the 180-day period, that transition period, do we think during that time there will be satisfactory timeline, not just to make the transition from one system to another, but to evaluate how the new system is working? Because based on the timeline, as far as I can tell, the next decision point would be basically the day that the 180-day period ends.
So operationally, yes, we do think that will be sufficient time to both make and evaluate the transition to long haul. And to the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I want to make sure.
So you used a
getting your
car
second
analogy. I'll use a different analogy. If you were bringing in transitioning like personnel, you want to have a certain period of time where the 2 people in the role can serve together so that you can transition from one high-level person to another with no disruption to the department, for instance, right? So when you leave, ideally, you'd be able to bring somebody in or have someone acting in your role that knows what they're doing when the new person comes in, and have a month or 2 weeks or whatever the period of time is, so that you can show them where the bathrooms are and who does what, and how things work, and maybe do some meetings together and do some introductions, etc. There's a transition period. In this case, the transition period is when the 2 people are together. There's an evaluation of a change, right? Are we going to move forward with a long-term change? If you look at the timeline that you've shared, there's almost no period in time where the new system is standing alone, and a period of time to evaluate that system, the long-haul system, standing alone and how well it's working. So my question is, as we come back to this, you don't have to answer it today, but how are we going to evaluate a new system if we have 2 systems functioning at the same time, and then we're making a decision of whether or not we're going to make a long-term change? Does that make sense?
It does. So couple pieces, and happy to provide more information on how the transition would be effectuated operationally. But a key part of evaluating the future system will be evaluating, from an engineering and operational and capacity perspective, the proposal we get back. So we will have a lot of information about the future system for long haul from the proposals we receive back from companies interested in doing this work. Starting, it's not only happening during the actual transition period. We will have a lot of information long before the transition itself is underway. Secondly, and you're absolutely right, a transition period is very important here because, as I said earlier, we want to make sure from the end user's perspective, businesses, residents, that there's no discernible change, right? That the system operates as flawlessly in the future as it has in the past. So that would be the purpose of the actual time where both systems were operating, i.e., we wouldn't. I'm trying to go for a metaphor here, but the transition period operationally would allow us to ensure that the new system is operating as it was explained and intended to, as represented in the proposal, so that we have confidence that the proposal is being implemented in the way that was guaranteed to us by the company. We would have that level of confidence both from the proposal, but the transition period would allow us to see it happening before we move away from the other system in order to ensure there's no disruption of service of any kind.
I appreciate that. Well, it would be helpful as we review for that to be really well understood of how we're going to be able to analyze and what that looks like, because I think for our purposes of understanding what the next steps and the next decision points are, I think how we evaluate it and the position we're going to be in order to evaluate are going to be very important.
Yeah.
So
happy to follow up with more on that.
Yield back. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Natalie Finn-Gonzalez.
I'm going to keep it brief. First of all, I am so sad that you're leaving in a few days, and looking at this huge issue, having our director leave is not a good thing. I'm just going to say it. But I'm glad for you and good for you. Congratulations. There is no way, and I'm going to say this on the record, that I will ever agree on dumping trash, our trash, somewhere else. No matter how you frame it, no matter how much analysis you're going to make, no matter the analysis on location, economic justice, there's no way that I will agree on dumping our trash in another jurisdiction, especially in year 2025, when Montgomery County has this pride of being ahead in the nation on climate justice. Imagine seeing trucks on 355 or 495 on their way to dump trash in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, wherever you're going to choose. I will never agree to that. So I'm just going to put that on record. No matter how pretty you're going to present it. 2, I'm looking at the timeline that you have. I mean, you expect us to have a full council briefing and then right away signing a contract without any type of public input. Nowhere in this timeline you can see public engagement. Nowhere in this timeline you're seeing how can we explain this to the community. They're just saying we're going to do this, and it's so wrong in so many ways. It feels rushed. It feels wrong, and I will not support this. This is the time for us to use technologies, as you briefly mentioned, to be innovative and not do this. So I say that on the record. I don't expect any responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. Not seeing any other colleagues wishing to speak at this time. I think you've received the council feedback on this. Again, we wanted to make sure that we were continuing the dialogue on these issues, doing so, as was mentioned, with the full council because of the importance of the decisions that will be made on this matter. We look forward to continuing that conversation. Director Monger, I think many of us are very disappointed that we will not be continuing it with you personally, but very grateful for the entire DEP team. We wish you well, and I know we will be seeing you around for a little bit more, but as this is your probably last public appearance before the council, we do want to just extend our thanks for your time here in Montgomery County and the achievements that we've been able to make. So thank you very much, and we will continue this conversation. With that, we are adjourned till our, oh no, I'm sorry, thank you. I want lunch. I'm sorry. I'm hungry. Item 3 on today's agenda is the consent calendar. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. Councilmember Vice President moved. Councilmember Lukey seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous of the folks who are on the dais. That is now recess. Grab your lunch, and we'll be back here at 1:30. Thank you, everyone.